The hustle and bustle of the Manhattan high-speed rail station filled the air as hundreds of commuters busily made their way between different lines. Announcements blared from loudspeakers, mixed with the sounds of luggage being dragged, laughter, and hurried footsteps. Ethan Walker, a successful businessman at the age of 48, entered the station with his wife, Sophia Walker, and their 6-year-old son, Noah. They were here to catch the Silver Line Prestige business class high-speed train, the most luxurious train from New York to Los Angeles. This was more than just a trip. It was a vacation after months of busy work. Ethan needed some time with his family, and Sophia wanted a comfortable journey with their son. Ethan wore a smart gray suit, simple but sophisticated. He didn't like to flaunt his wealth, but his confident demeanor and neat appearance made him stand out from the crowd. Sophia, in her elegant blue dress, strode beside him, holding Noah's hand as he eagerly watched the bustling scene of the station. "Mommy, I want to get on the train," Noah exclaimed, clutching the toy train he always carried with him. He loved trains, and today was his first time experiencing business class. "Be patient, honey, we're almost there." Sophia smiled, gently stroking her son's head. Ethan smiled along, looking at his son with gentle eyes. Although he was a serious businessman at work, he was always a devoted father when he returned home. When they reached the business class ticketing area, a stewardess in a charcoal blue uniform approached. "Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more captivating tales, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Your support means the world to us." Charlotte Green, 35, was the chief stewardess of the train. With more than a decade of experience, she was confident in her management abilities. However, her eyes wavered when she saw the Walker family. They didn't look like the type of passenger she was used to seeing in business class. Or at least, that's what she thought. Ethan didn't notice Charlotte's appraising gaze. He smiled, politely handing her his family's 3 VIP prestige tickets for her to inspect. These tickets not only guaranteed business class seating, but also came with premium perks like special meals, privacy, and personal service. Charlotte took the tickets, glancing at them more slowly than necessary. A flicker of doubt crossed her face. "Mr. and Mrs. Walker, and Noah Walker?" She read each word slowly, as if verifying something. "Yes, exactly," Ethan replied in a calm voice. Charlotte still didn't return the tickets immediately. She frowned slightly, looking from Ethan to Sophia, then to Noah. Her eyes lingered on the boy playing innocently with the toy train, unaware of the tension that was building. "Give me a moment," Charlotte said quickly, turning and walking away without further explanation. Sophia frowned, turning to Ethan. "What do you think is going on?" Ethan squeezed his wife's hand to reassure her. "It's probably just a check, nothing serious." But inside, he sensed something was wrong. Charlotte walked to the counter, where a junior clerk was working. "I need to verify the Walker family's tickets," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. The clerk looked at the screen, entering the information from the tickets. After a few seconds, he nodded. "Everything is in order. They booked 2 months ago, paid in full." Charlotte pursed her lips. "Are you sure? I just want to make sure there's nothing wrong." The clerk looked at her quizzically. "Absolutely. They are VIP passengers." Charlotte didn't respond right away. There was a strange feeling in her gut, not out of genuine doubt, but because this family didn't look like the VIPs she usually saw on the train. The business class passengers she had served throughout her career were usually white businessmen, politicians, or celebrities. But Ethan, Sophia, and Noah? They were none of those things. She knew she had no legitimate reason to turn them away, though. But instead of admitting her mistake, Charlotte decided to follow her instincts. She turned back to the ticketing area, this time with a more serious expression. "I'm sorry, but there's a system error with your tickets." Her voice was sharp, no longer fake polite. "We can't confirm your seats in business class. I'll arrange economy for your family." A moment of silence fell. Sophia's eyes widened, while Ethan kept his composure, but his gaze sharpened. "System error, you say?" Ethan asked, his voice unwavering. "Yes," Charlotte replied, avoiding his gaze. "Then why is it only our tickets that have problems? Do other passengers have to be checked?" Sophia asked, her voice filled with doubt. Charlotte was confused for a second, but quickly regained her firm attitude. We are doing random checks, and your tickets are currently unconfirmed. If you cooperate, I can arrange seats in the economy class immediately. Noah still didn't understand what was going on, but he could feel the tension in the air. Mom, why don't we get on the train? The boy pulled Sophia's hand, his eyes wide. Sophia bent down, gently patting her son, but her heart was seething with anger. She looked at Ethan, seeing a cold glint in his eyes that she rarely saw. Ethan slowly took a step forward, looking straight at Charlotte. We bought business class tickets, valid tickets. I want a good reason for this immediately. Charlotte opened her mouth to say something, but before she could, another voice rang out from behind her. What's the problem here? Everyone turned to see a man in a suit approaching. It was Andrew Clark, the CEO of Silverline Prestige, who happened to be at the station today. Charlotte paled instantly. I also want to know why a family with business class tickets was asked to go down to economy class, Andrew said, his sharp gaze sweeping over Charlotte. Ethan looked at Sophia and they both knew the situation had changed. Below is the extended version of Part 2, Flight Confrontation, which continues seamlessly from the previous part, ensuring the continuity and development of the story naturally. Andrew Clark, the CEO of Silverline Prestige, looked from Ethan to Charlotte with a questioning gaze. His years of experience in the transportation industry had taught him to recognize when an employee had made a serious mistake, and right now he had a strong feeling that one had just happened. Chief Steward Charlotte, I ask again, what is going on here? His voice was low but authoritative, making those around him hold their breaths. Charlotte stiffened, trying to keep her composure. She knew this was a situation that could seriously affect her job. But even though she felt the pressure, she didn't want to fully admit her mistake. Mr. Clark, she said, her voice a little strained. I'm just doing an extra check on this passenger's ticket. There seems to be a system error with their ticket, and I want to make sure everyone is seated properly. Ethan crossed his arms over his chest, his sharp eyes fixed on Charlotte. System error? Our tickets were scanned, validated. You double-checked mine, but you didn't do that for anyone else. May I ask why? Andrew tilted his head, his gaze growing colder. System error? He turned to the nearby ticket counter clerk who was still watching the situation with a puzzled look. Is there a problem with the system? The clerk shook his head immediately. There is no error, sir. The Walker family's tickets were validated before. Charlotte felt a cold sweat start to run down her spine. She had no choice but to stand her ground. There might be a glitch. I just want to make sure everything's in order. Andrew took a deep breath, his voice sharpening. Let me get this straight, Charlotte. You're telling a business class passenger who has a valid ticket that there's a system error when there's no actual error to be confirmed, and based on that, you're trying to move them to economy? Charlotte swallowed. She knew she was backed into a corner. Ethan observed the situation, but instead of feeling satisfied, he felt frustrated. He'd been through a lot of unfair situations in his life, but he'd always kept his cool and handled things rationally. He looked over at Sophia, who was holding Noah's hand tightly, her eyes filled with restraint. I don't care what you think, Ethan said, his voice calm but heavy. I just want an honest answer. Why was my family the only one being searched? Why weren't the other passengers subjected to the same thing? Charlotte was at a loss. She knew that if she admitted the truth, she would be in big trouble, but if she continued to deny it, things could get worse. Andrew Clark was running out of patience. He turned to Ethan, his voice clear and commanding. Mr. Walker, I apologize for the inconvenience. Please board the train immediately. Your seats will remain as they are. Charlotte's eyes widened. Mr. Clark, I was just... Enough, Andrea interrupted, his voice carrying absolute authority. Passengers need not explain further. You follow me. Charlotte stiffened, but did not dare to protest. She knew that any excuses were futile at this point. Then said nothing more, just silently took Sophia's hand and led Noah onto the train. As they entered the business class cabin, the atmosphere inside changed instantly. Several passengers had witnessed the scene and were looking at them with sympathy. A middle-aged man in a fine suit leaned toward them. I saw it all. he said quietly, his eyes full of annoyance. "It's so unfair. I don't think she checked anyone but your family." Sophia smiled weakly, but Ethan just nodded. "Thank you," he said. "I don't think it's over yet." And as he had predicted, it wasn't over yet. As the walkers settled into their seats elsewhere on the train, Charlotte Green sat in Andrew Clark's study. The tension in the air was so thick that it was suffocating. Andrew Clark sat across from her, his hands on the table, his eyes sharp. "I need you to be honest with me, Charlotte," he said slowly but clearly. "Why did you decide to check the walkers? And don't tell me it was just a random process." Charlotte knew she was backed into a corner. She could continue to deny it, but the truth was clear. She took a deep breath, trying to find a way to explain herself without doing too much damage. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "I thought they weren't suitable for business class, but I was wrong." Andrew Clark leaned back in his chair, his eyes expressionless. "You thought they weren't suitable?" He repeated the words, as if to let her ponder what they really meant. Charlotte swallowed. "I didn't mean to offend them. I let my personal prejudices cloud my judgment." Andrew closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them with a sharper gaze than ever. "Then you should understand that such prejudice has no place in our business, and now you will be held accountable for your actions." Charlotte felt her heart drop to the bottom of the abyss. In the business class cabin, Ethan placed one hand on the armrest, looking out the window. Sophia sat next to him, silently squeezing his hand. "Do you think she will be fired?" she asked softly. Ethan thought for a moment, then shook his head slightly. "I don't care if she is fired or not. What I care about is whether the shipping company learns its lesson or not." Noah continued to play with his toy ship, unaware that he had just become a witness to an important situation. Sophia leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder, sighing softly. "Anyway, at least we were treated fairly in the end." Ethan said nothing, but his eyes reflected determination, because deep down he knew that this was only the beginning of the story. Below is an extended version of Part 3, The Truth is Revealed, which continues seamlessly from the previous section, ensuring a tight connection and a natural progression of the story. Charlotte Green sat motionless in the office of Andrew Clark, CEO of Silverline Prestige, her hands on the desk, sweat beading on her forehead. In front of her, Andrew watched intently, his eyes full of consideration. Ellen Porter, one of Silverline's senior directors of customer experience, was also present at this urgent meeting. "Miss Green," Andrew said, his voice calm but cold, "give me one good explanation for why you deliberately removed the walkers from business class, even though their tickets were valid." Charlotte opened her mouth to reply, then closed it. At this point, any excuse seemed pointless. "I was wrong," she said, her voice choking. Ellen Porter flipped open a file on the table, containing a report of the incident, along with feedback from the passengers around her. "Wrong in what way?" she asked, her voice stern. Charlotte took a deep breath, trying to keep her composure. "I let my personal biases influence my decision. I suspected the walkers because they didn't look like typical business class passengers." Andrew leaned back in his chair, his eyes sharpening. "Do you know who Ethan Walker is?" Charlotte looked up, frowning. "I don't." Andrew exchanged glances with Ellen, and with a nod, Mrs. Porter entered a few commands into the computer in front of her. The large screen in the conference room immediately displayed Ethan Walker's personal profile, including details about his career, achievements, and most importantly, his role in Silverline Prestige. Charlotte's eyes widened when she saw the words "Major Shareholder, Silverline Prestige." She stammered. "A shareholder of the company?" Andrew nodded slowly, his eyes showing no pity. "Not only a shareholder, but one of the largest investors in Silverline Prestige. He not only owns a business class ticket, he has a say in how this company operates." Charlotte felt her heart sink. She had just deliberately discriminated against one of the most important people in the shipping line, not just a rich or famous client, but one who could dictate company policy. Ellen Porter looked at her, her eyes sharp as knives. Do you realize the gravity of this situation, Miss Green? Charlotte swallowed. I didn't mean to discriminate against him. Andrew narrowed his eyes. You say you didn't mean to, but your actions say otherwise. Let me repeat. You double-checked the walkers' tickets, even though there was no problem. You tried to move them into economy without any valid reason. And you didn't do that to any other passenger. If that's not discrimination, what do you call it? Charlotte felt her throat dry. She knew that nothing she said now would change the facts. Andrew leaned forward, his voice more serious than ever. You treated the walkers not out of process, but out of personal prejudice, and that is unacceptable. Charlotte bowed her head, at a loss for words. Ethan Walker sat upright in his seat, staring out the window. Even though he had been reassigned to his business class seat, his mind was still clouded by the events that had just occurred. Sophia sat beside him, placing her hand on his arm. What are you thinking about? Ethan sighed, turning to look at his wife. I don't care if Charlotte gets fired. What I care about is how this company handles this. This isn't the first time something like this has happened on a train or a plane, and it certainly won't be the last. Sophia nodded, her gaze darkening. If you weren't a shareholder in this company, this would have been overlooked like so many other times. Ethan pursed his lips, knowing that, deep down, he didn't want to use his power to demand justice for himself. He wanted the system to change, for real. At the same time, a new attendant walked in. She looked nervous as she looked at Ethan, but she remained professional. Mr. Walker, Director Andrew Clark would like to apologize and see you as soon as the train reaches the main station. Ethan nodded slightly, then looked at Sophia. It seems they understand that this can't be over with an apology. Sophia squeezed his hand lightly. What are you going to do? Ethan smiled slightly, but there was determination in his eyes. Let's see how serious they are. If they want to change, they'll have to prove it with action. In the director's office, Charlotte was waiting for the final decision. She knew she couldn't escape the consequences. Andrew Clark looked at her for a moment, then announced, You will be suspended immediately. The Human Resources Committee will review this case and make a final decision on whether or not you can continue to work for the company. Charlotte closed her eyes, feeling as if her world had collapsed. Please collect your belongings as soon as the train reaches the main station, Ellen Portis said, her voice devoid of any pity. We will contact you regarding the disciplinary meeting. Charlotte just nodded weakly. In business class, Ethan Walker folded his hands in his lap, scanning the passengers around him. Some still glanced at him with respect after what had happened. But for Ethan, this wasn't about being respected. This was about changing an unjust system. He pulled out his phone, opened his contacts, and dialed a number. I want to schedule a meeting with the board, he said, his voice low but firm, as soon as the train reaches the station. He hung up, turning to Sophia. We're not letting this go. Sophia smiled, her eyes full of pride. You never do. Ethan looked out the window, where the city lights flashed by. The fight had only just begun. Here is the extended version of Part 4, Charlotte's Aftermath, which continues seamlessly from the previous section, ensuring a tight connection and a natural progression. The train whistle blew, signaling that Silverline Prestige was approaching Los Angeles Central Station. Outside, the city lights were shining brightly, but inside the train, the atmosphere in the business class cabin was still heavy from the recent incident. Ethan Walker sat upright in his business class seat, his eyes still fixed on the window. But instead of enjoying the view, his mind was focused on the upcoming meeting with the Silverline Prestige Board of Directors. The meeting he had requested as soon as the train arrived. Inside the train's executive car, Charlotte Green sat motionless on a hard wooden chair. The air in this room was much colder than the rest of the train, or at least that was how she felt. Across from her, Andrew Clark, Silverline CEO, and Ellen Porter, the customer experience manager, were reviewing the file on Charlotte's recent incident. Charlotte's hands clenched tightly on the hem of her uniform skirt, her heart burning. She knew this was the moment that would decide her fate. Andrew Clark put the file down on the table, looked up at Charlotte. Did you know that this incident was reported directly to the board? Charlotte nodded, her voice weak. "I know, sir." Ellen Porter crossed her arms, her eyes as sharp as a judge waiting for a defense from a defendant. "Did you know that this incident had spread on social media? That not only the passengers on the train, but also Silver Line staff and the media had begun to talk?" Charlotte was startled, her eyes widening. "Media?" Andrew sighed, turning the laptop screen toward Charlotte. There were shocking headlines from major news sites. Silver Line Prestige faces discrimination charges. VIP passenger forced off seat without reason. Silver Line major, shareholder moved by staff, power of money or customer service flaw. What Silver Line major investor Ethan Walker says about high-speed train incident? Charlotte felt the blood drain from her face. She had never expected the conversation to go this far. "I don't," she tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Ellen Porter closed her laptop, a loud clack that echoed in the room. "Miss Green," she said slowly but with authority, "not only has your actions brought discredit to the company, but they have also exposed us to the wrath of our customers and the media. Do you realize the serious consequences?" Charlotte clenched her fists, her whole body shaking. I didn't mean to cause this. I just thought—" "What do you think?" Andrew interrupted, his voice colder than ever. "Do you think a family who doesn't look like regular business-class travelers should be treated differently? Do you think they don't deserve the services they paid for?" Charlotte fell silent. She knew that any excuses at this point would only make things worse. Andrew Clark leaned back in his chair, folding his arms over his chest. "Ms. Green, Silver Line Prestige cannot and will not tolerate this behavior. After considering all the reports, customer feedback, and the extent of the impact this incident has had on the company's reputation, we have come to this conclusion." Charlotte swallowed. "What decision?" Ellen Porter leaned forward, her voice as sharp as a knife. "You will be suspended immediately. Within the next 48 hours, a disciplinary committee will review and determine whether you are fit to continue working for Silver Line." The room fell silent. Charlotte felt her head spinning. She knew she could be reprimanded, maybe demoted, but immediate suspension? The possibility of losing her job altogether? "Ellen Porter, Charlotte tried to find the words, but nothing came out of her mouth other than despair. Andrew stood up, his eyes sharp. "The meeting ends here. You may leave." Charlotte stood silently, her legs heavy as if each step was sinking her deeper into the quagmire of her own mistakes. When the office door closed behind her, she was almost out of breath. The career she had spent a decade building was in danger of falling apart in just a few hours. As the Silver Line Prestige officially pulled into Los Angeles' downtown station, passengers began to pack up their bags to leave the train. In the business class cabin, Ethan Walker remained seated, waiting for the next developments. An employee stepped forward, bowing respectfully. "Mr. Walker, the board of directors has prepared the meeting room. They are ready to meet with you now." Ethan stood up, turning to Sophia. "It won't take long." Sophia squeezed her husband's hand, her eyes filled with support. "Do what you have to do." Ethan stepped off the train, heading toward the boardroom. In a far corner of the platform, Charlotte Green quietly stepped off the train, head bowed, clutching her handbag. No more respectful glances from her colleagues. No more confidence or authority from a chief flight attendant. Only one woman remains, having just realized that one wrong decision can change her life. Charlotte walks away, but she knows she can't hide forever. The true consequences of her actions are still waiting. And on the other side, Ethan Walker is laying the groundwork to ensure that no one else has to go through what his family has gone through. His fight is just beginning. Below is an extended version of Part 5, Reclaiming Justice and Reform, which continues seamlessly from the previous episode, ensuring a tight connection and a natural progression of the story. The Silver Line Prestige Executive Office is located on the top floor of Los Angeles Central Station, with large glass panels overlooking the city lights at night. Inside, a tense atmosphere pervades the luxurious room as Ethan Walker enters. Waiting in the room was Robert Langston, the CEO of Silver Line Prestige. along with a board of 5 senior executives. They sat around a long, polished mahogany conference table, surrounded by files and tablets displaying information about the incident. All eyes were on Ethan. "Good evening, Mr. Walker," Robert Langston said, trying to keep his voice calm. "We sincerely apologize for the unpleasant experience you and your family had on the train today." Ethan nodded but did not respond immediately. He pulled up a chair, his eyes scanning the room with a cold gaze. "To be honest, I'm not here to hear an apology." His voice was low but firm. "This is more than just an individual misconduct. It's a symptom of a larger, systemic problem." The board exchanged glances. An older woman, Margaret Hale, the Director of Human Resources, clasped her hands together and spoke up. "We agree with you completely, and we are in the process of reviewing our options." Ethan tilted his head, smiling faintly. "Review? How long are you going to review for? Until the public dies down? Until another incident occurs?" No one answered. Robert Langston rubbed his temples, letting out a long sigh. "We have no intention of letting this matter go, Mr. Walker." The board met today to discuss the case of flight attendant Charlotte Green. She has been suspended immediately and will face a disciplinary committee. Ethan shook his head. "So the problem is just one person? Just fire her and it will be over." Langston frowned. "That's not what I said." Ethan placed his hands on the table, his voice sharp. "Let me be blunt. If she can act like this without fear of consequences, it's not just her fault. It's the system's fault. Silverline Prestige has allowed its work culture to tolerate discriminatory behavior. That has to change." Margaret Hale nodded slightly, as if she had anticipated this reaction. "Mr. Walker, what do you want? What do you want us to do to demonstrate that we're serious about change?" Ethan looked her straight in the eye without hesitation. "I want to see concrete changes, immediately." The board was silent for a few seconds. Finally, Robert Langston took a deep breath and pressed a button on the computer screen in front of him. A document appeared on a large screen behind him, listing the steps the company planned to take. Mandatory training on unconscious bias and customer service culture for all employees, especially flight attendants. More transparent monitoring and complaints systems where passengers can report incidents of discrimination or poor service. Establishing a customer service review committee made up of independent members to ensure that passenger complaints are considered fairly. Strengthening hiring and evaluation criteria, ensuring that no one is influenced by personal bias in their work. Partnering with a third party to periodically evaluate service quality and customer satisfaction. Ethan looked at the list, but didn't react immediately. He realized that these steps were a step forward, but they weren't enough. "Good," he said, "but I want a clearer commitment." Langston frowned. "What do you mean?" Ethan leaned forward, his voice carrying weight. "I want monthly reports on the progress of these changes. I want concrete numbers, feedback from employees, and evidence that the system is actually working. And I want a review committee that includes a neutral party, not just an internal employee." Margaret Hale nodded. "That can be arranged." Ethan continued, "I would also like to see a formal apology from Silverline Prestige, not just to me, but to all the customers who have been in similar situations, and it must be made public." Langston hesitated for a moment, but then he nodded. "We will do that." The meeting lasted another hour, with Ethan overseeing every detail of the reform plan. He wanted to make sure that this was not just a move to appease public opinion, but actually creating a better, fairer system. When the meeting ended, Langston reached out to shake Ethan's hand. "We will do what we promised, and I hope that you will continue to accompany Silverline Prestige on this journey of change." Ethan took his hand, but his voice remained cold. "I won't just go along. I'll keep a close eye on it. If I see any signs that these promises aren't being kept, I'll make sure this company is held accountable." Langston swallowed but nodded. "We understand." As he walked out of the conference room, Ethan felt a breeze blow through the long hallways of the building. He let out a long breath. It wasn't over, but at least it was a start. Sophia was waiting for him outside, a steaming mug of coffee in her hand. "How's it going?" Ethan smiled slightly. "I think we've laid the groundwork, but we have a long way to go." Sophia nodded. "Then we'll keep going." Ethan looked at his phone screen where he saw the email confirmation from the board of directors about the reform plan. He knew this wasn't just a personal victory. It was a victory for everyone who had ever been wronged. And he won't stop until justice is served. In a small cafe near the train station, Charlotte Green sat alone, clutching her phone. She had just received an email summoning a disciplinary meeting from Silverline. Her eyes scanned the words. "The board will consider whether you are still fit for your position." Charlotte put down the phone, her head bowed. For the first time in her career, she felt truly afraid of her future. And she knew that this was only the beginning of the consequences she would face. Here's an extended version of Part 6, The End and the Lesson, which continues seamlessly from. The sound of rain pattered against the windows of Silverline Prestige headquarters, where the board meeting had just ended. Ethan Walker stood near the glass, watching the light from the tall buildings reflect on the wet pavement. The feeling of satisfaction did not come to him immediately, because this was not the end. Change doesn't happen overnight, he knows. Policies and promises from management can be forgotten if no one follows through and pushes for them. But Ethan isn't the type to back down. If he starts a fight, he'll see it through to the end. The fall of Charlotte Green. On the other side of town, Charlotte Green sat quietly in a small cafe, stirring her cold tea. In front of her was her laptop with the final email from Silverline Prestige, the official decision to fire her. She had expected this outcome, but seeing the words confirming it still left her with a deep sense of emptiness. After a full review of the events on the Silverline Prestige, the disciplinary board has come to the conclusion that you are no longer fit to continue as a chief flight attendant. This decision is effective immediately. Charlotte closed her laptop, her head leaning back against the chair. Everything she had built over the past 10 years, now gone because of one mistake. But deep down, she knew it wasn't just a simple mistake. It was a mistake in her thinking. For the first time, Charlotte truly faced what she had done. Why had she thought the Walker family didn't belong in business class? Why had she made decisions based on their appearances instead of what was truly important? And, most importantly, why hadn't she realized it sooner? Charlotte sighed, her gaze turning out the window. She couldn't turn back time, but perhaps she could start over, and this time she would do it differently. 3 months after the incident on the train, Silverline Prestige's system had begun to show noticeable changes. Unconscious bias training has been rolled out across the entire network. More than 90% of employees have completed the first phase of the training, which focuses on respecting diversity, serving customers fairly, and identifying personal bias. An employee behavior monitoring system has been updated. Every business class passenger can now provide direct feedback after their trip, and complaints are taken more seriously. An independent internal audit committee has been established, made up of human rights and customer service experts and representatives from public transport organizations. Their task is to evaluate internal policies and recommend improvements based on real data. The carrier has issued a public apology, committed to making changes, and ensuring that similar incidents will never happen again. On social media, once outraged passengers are now tracking Silverline Prestige's progress, with many acknowledging that the company has made positive strides. But Ethan Walker isn't entirely satisfied. One morning in October, Ethan received an email from Robert Langston, Silverline Prestige's CEO. "We appreciate your patience during this process. We look forward to continuing to work together to make Silverline a symbol of fair and professional service." Ethan read the email, then leaned back in his chair. He didn't just want an apology. He wanted a new culture. He dialed Margaret Hale, Silverline's Director of Human Resources. "Miss Hale, I'd like to schedule a meeting with the leadership team about the company's long-term plans." "Mr. Walker, what would you like to discuss?" Margaret asked. Ethan looked out the window, where the early morning sun was shining on the city. "I want to make sure that what we're doing is not just a temporary reaction, but a lasting change. I want Silverline to not only treat its customers fairly, but to be a model for service in the transportation industry. Margaret was silent for a moment. Then she said, "I'll set up a meeting." Ethan nodded. His fight wasn't over. 3 months after being fired, Charlotte Green started a customer service retraining program at a small transportation company. This time she listened more, learned more. She realized that prejudice was not something that could be eliminated immediately. It was something she needed to face and change every day. One afternoon, after the training ended, she opened her phone and wrote an email. "Dear Mr. Ethan Walker, I know that an apology may not change what I did, but I want to say that I am truly sorry. I also want to thank you for forcing Silverline to change. Without you, I may never have seen my own mistakes. I hope that one day I can make up for it by becoming a better waiter. Sincerely, Charlotte Green." She pressed send, then let out a long breath. Across the city, Ethan opened the email on his phone. He read it, then put the phone down, saying nothing. He didn't need an apology from Charlotte, but at least she had learned her lesson. A few months after the incident, Ethan, Sophia, and Noah boarded another high-speed train. This time, when they entered the business class, the flight attendants served them professionally, without hesitation. Noah smiled brightly, waving the toy plane in his hand. Is no one going to give us a hard time this time, Dad?" Ethan laughed, patting his son's head. "No, son, because this time we helped change everything." Ethan's fight changed not just one train, it changed an entire system. And that's the biggest lesson in this story.